truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Wednesday, March 13th, 2024, the 1148th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening to the podcast on the day of its release. The only way to do that is by becoming a paid subscriber at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month, and in doing so, you will be supporting me, the work I do, and this show as it expands. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free a couple days later on a wide variety of podcast platforms and, of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'm your moderator. Okay, so the day is finally here. The day you thought was never going to come. Donald Trump is now officially recognized as the Republican nominee for president in this 2024 election cycle. Following a series of fake debates that Donald Trump did not participate in, and following a series of fake caucuses and primaries, we have been told that Donald Trump is the winner and that he has amassed enough delegates to make him the official presumptive nominee. Is that the same thing as the nominee? Well, no, but he technically has enough bound delegates to achieve the necessary number of delegates, assuming that nothing happens between now and the RNC. But come on, nothing's going to happen. Probably. The New York Times covered this monumental achievement this way. Donald Trump and Joe Biden clinched their party nominations. Now, Joe Biden was basically running unopposed, and his most powerful competitor was uncommitted. A group of supposedly Democrat voters that were added on to the vote total despite not supporting anyone. We were told that they were all sending a message to Joe Biden about his overreach in this Israel-Pakistan situation, but there's no reason these people even have to exist. Now, I'm not saying none do. I just don't think all of them do. I think the people who control the election fraud apparatus want to try to make it look like there are Democrats who are at least enthusiastic about something. I guess they think that the Palestine thing is that something. They try to tell us it's the abortion thing, but nobody really believes that. So they're doing the Palestine thing. I guess we'll see. No one is enthusiastic about Joe Biden. He had an event in Georgia on Saturday, as did Donald Trump. Donald Trump's event, as always, was packed. Joe Biden's event had about 40 people at it. They had all these stanchions set up outside to facilitate the entry of at least hundreds of people, if not 1,000, in an orderly fashion. But there was no one there. It was hard to tell from the photos of the crowd whether anyone was there beyond media and people involved in Joe Biden's quote unquote campaign. And naturally, he mumbled his way through. President Biden and former President Donald J. Trump on Tuesday secured the delegates necessary to clinch their party's presidential nominations, according to the Associated Press, cementing a general election rematch in November, months in the making. Both men and their campaigns have long anticipated this moment. Mr. Biden faced only token opposition in the Democratic primary, as is typical for a sitting president. while Mr. Trump had been his party's dominant frontrunner for months. Well, no, he was the only possible winner the entire time. Donald Trump's full participation in this supposed campaign was going out and giving rally speeches and talking to the American public. He did media appearances and town halls, but he didn't participate in debates. There was never any chance anyone else was going to win. It was not even a serious possibility. The process we saw play out was a narrative process. It taught the American people about what they actually wanted in a candidate, what their priorities were. I hope that the fact the fake primary happened brought people along toward Donald Trump. Now, that's one of those things we'll never know, because we wouldn't know what the counterfactual situation would have been like. What if Trump was just the obvious and only choice, and the entirety of the Republican Party was saying it must be Donald Trump because the 2020 election was stolen, and they were out there loudly and proudly supporting that position and showing the evidence. Everybody knows that Donald Trump won. There is no evidence anywhere, and no one actually believes that Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes. What would have happened in that circumstance? I don't know. This is the circumstance we got. Things worked. They have brought us here. The nation understands that the Republican Party will only accept Donald Trump and none of these ridiculous competitors, not Ron DeSantis, not Nikki Haley. And if they need to run through the process again with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., so be it. I would rather not have to go through that exercise. But if we do, all good. Same as the Ron program. And the result will be the same. Tuesday's results cleared the way for a 2024 general election campaign that, at just under 8 months, is set to be one of the longest in modern American history and will be the country's first presidential rematch in nearly 70 years, because they have a so-called incumbent running virtually unopposed in the fake president Joe Biden, and we have an actual incumbent in Donald Trump. This is unusual because normally there would be one real incumbent. That person would face no competition, and then it would just be a matter of time before the nominee of the other party was named. It usually doesn't happen this early. Skipping down in the article. That Mr. Trump was able to lock up the Republican nomination fairly quickly demonstrates the grasp he has kept on the party and his conservative base, despite his 2020 loss and failed efforts to overturn it, a string of disappointing midterm losses by candidates he backed, and his 91 felony charges in 4 criminal cases. And as I hope to get to later, that's no longer true. It's no longer 91 felony charges in 4 criminal cases, but he's still so very, very indicted. Now, were those midterm losses his fault? No, they weren't. There was election fraud there, and the whole thing was subverted by the conservative establishment, the Republican establishment. It's hard to call them conservatives. And of course, Trump didn't lose in 2020, so why would anyone be upset about his efforts to overturn it? The former president won nearly every nominating contest that awarded delegates, with Ms. Haley scoring wins in only Vermont and Washington, D.C., where she became the first woman to ever win a Republican presidential primary or caucus. Why isn't she Mrs. Haley? Doesn't the New York Times have a style guide that would suggest that? But Mr. Trump's swift path to the nomination also reflects a backroom effort by him and his political team to bend rules around primaries and delegates in his favor. You see that? Trump cheated in order to win. Wait a second. What were the results last night? Oh, Donald Trump won 85% in Georgia, 93% in Mississippi, 74% in Washington, and 97% in Hawaii. And Hawaii's dominated by communists. They should be getting in some of those Washington numbers. Trump really manipulated the system hard in all those cases. That's what really happened in these real elections. In one critical example, Trump's campaign worked to shape California's rules, leading party officials there to adopt a winner-take-all system that would award the state's delegates to a campaign who swept 50% of the vote statewide. That threshold favored Mr. Trump, the only candidate polling at that level there. Now, you might remember when Harmeet Dillon and the Republican Party in California tried to change that rule to favor Ron DeSantis so that he could get some of those sweet, sweet California delegates, despite the fact that Donald Trump would have won the state by quite a lot. So it would be easy to say that the primary season is now over, but that would be incorrect. There still are primaries in other states and some of these same states. For instance, Georgia splits its presidential primary and its down ticket primaries. If you want to see your state load itself up with rhinos down ballot, then check out of primary season, forget all about it. But if you actually want to create a government in this country that serves with the consent of those it governs, then we need to push for election integrity and at the same time, make sure we are figuring out who the true America First candidates are and putting some momentum behind them. I would expect that Donald Trump will continue highlighting various MAGA and America First politicians around the country who he wants his base to support. Now, it is up to us to actually look at those candidates and vet those candidates. And if Donald Trump gives them a thumbs up, that's great. That should factor into our decisions, but ultimately it's our decision to decide who to support. It's okay to have your litmus tests, and it's okay to make demands of these people if they are asking for your vote and asking you to send them to Washington to represent your interests. And the process of vetting can be very productive and very beneficial, regardless of whether or not our election apparatus has been cleansed of the corruption and manipulation by the time November 5th rolls around. My litmus test is their position on election fraud. If they can't say that Trump won in 2020, if they can't say that elections are stolen around the country at every level, from our local city councils and school boards all the way up to congressmen, senators, governors, presidents, then they're not getting my vote. The little R next to their name won't do it, and it doesn't matter to me where else we might agree. It's very simple. It's been the most relevant issue in the country for the last nearly 3.5 years now. If they haven't figured it out, that person is totally unfit to be in a position of public trust. So we are told that Trump now has enough delegates committed to him to be the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party. The general election campaign has begun in earnest. But yet, this primary period has not revealed to the American public the fact that our elections cannot be trusted in any way and are stolen routinely. It has shown us a number of ways that elections, particularly primaries, are rigged and are manipulated, such as these open primaries where Democrats can vote in the Republican primary just in an attempt to manipulate who the Republican candidate ultimately is. They go in and vote to try to pick their opponent. They try to move away from caucuses, as they did in Nevada, try to replace all that with a primary that they know they can rig. So the American people were exposed to a few tricks throughout this primary process, but certainly not all the tricks. We still haven't had that big moment where everyone just realizes, oh yeah, our elections are totally stolen. There's no way anyone could have any trust in this process. And don't get me wrong, I do think we will have that moment before November 5th, but we haven't had it yet. And if we don't have it, I don't know how anyone can expect anything but a stolen election on November 5th. Now, if Trump was announced the winner and just accepted that and accepted the rest of the results, we would end up with a Donald Trump presidency and terrible rhinos all up and down the ballot and more attempts to subvert his presidency throughout his term. If Trump was announced the winner, I think his first step would have to be calling for the elections around the country at every level to be fully forensically audited and each and every vote proven for its legitimacy before it is counted in the total. Now, I don't know how long that would take through the courts and through whatever else, assuming that the Uniparty has any ability to wage lawfare. And unless there is some other radical change, I'm not sure it would be possible to fix the elections and bring enough attention to the necessity to fix elections without seeing an election stolen by the fake president, Joe Biden, once again. And people say, how do we get out of this? And I think that we are being shown how you get out of it. And the answer kind of lies within the problem. Donald Trump has been declared the winner of the Republican nomination. He is the presumptive Republican nominee after a series of fake primaries. Now, did more voters come out to vote for Donald Trump in all of these states? I have absolutely no doubt about that. Donald Trump is not only the most popular politician in the Republican Party, he's the most popular politician in the United States of America. He might be the most popular politician in the world, and he might be the most popular politician in the history of the world. So I have absolutely no doubt that he actually won. But at the same time, I also have absolutely no reason to believe that any of the reported vote totals are correct. How do we know that the quote-unquote Nikki Haley voters, these Democrat crossovers, weren't just new registries that they loaded in and manipulated to make it look like those people have a voting history? Now, I certainly can't know that that's what they are and that the people in control of the election apparatus actually did that. I am not saying that. I'm saying there is absolutely no way for us to know that didn't happen because there aren't any safeguards in the system preventing it. For all we know, Nikki Haley has hundreds of thousands of votes from non-existent voters tied to the identities of illegal aliens or dead people or who knows what else. The point is, you cannot trust these reported results, and you should not trust them. Me saying that doesn't somehow invalidate Donald Trump's position, his status, his level of popularity, or these primary wins as we are referring to them. The thing to make sure we do not do is fool ourselves into believing that because Donald Trump is winning by these wide margins, therefore the election system must have been fixed. There is absolutely no reason to think that, and there isn't a state in the country whose elections have been made trustworthy. But you see, here's the thing. Donald Trump won anyway, by a lot. Everybody knows it. Everybody agrees with it. Nobody challenges it, including his opponents. They challenge it the least. And as far as any normie knows, we have just had an entirely standard primary process that has now produced a winner according to the normal rules in a totally normal situation. And now I'm certainly not saying that's ideal. I'm not even sure it's good. I want people to know what's actually going on, but I at least give some credence to the argument that many people don't actually want to know what's going on. And of course, I'm also open to the argument that all of this is fake on a level that we don't even spend much time exploring. But we can leave that aside. They do not have to have any understanding of what's going on right now to know that Donald Trump has won the Republican nomination. It doesn't matter how it happened. They know that it did happen, and they are not raising any objection to it. Now, is that because they have assured themselves that the reported results accurately reflect the will and intent of the voter? No, it can't be because of that. None of them know about that at all. They just assume that if what they're being told is wrong, someone will correct it. And if no one comes along to correct it, if in fact no one comes along to even challenge it, then they will assume that it absolutely must be true and correct. So they have no objection to Donald Trump being named the Republican nominee. They know it. They have no objection to it. And the reason they're not considering any objection to it is because that result matches what they understand about their real life to the extent they understand it. Now, if they are home all the time, consuming the central narrative from the mainstream media, then of course they believe all of these things are true because they're told all of these things all the time. To them, this stuff is all 100% real, and the 100% real outcome is that Donald Trump is the Republican nominee. Now, they can feel any way they like about that. But the point is, they're not contesting it because it matches their reality. People who hate Trump are forced to reckon with the fact that there are a whole lot of people who don't. It's not just some small portion of Republicans. It's not just uneducated whites. It's not just 37% of the population. Donald Trump is up big on polls against Joe Biden. Donald Trump is up big on polls against Michelle Obama. Donald Trump is up huge in polls against Gavin Newsom. Now, I don't know why they're polling these things, but it's fun for the narrative. And it's not like anyone is out there lighting themselves on fire, screaming about the injustice of these polls. Everybody looks at the polls and they're like, okay, yeah, I can see that. Everybody, even the people who hate Trump and think that Joe Biden is going to come back and win, they are providing explanations about why the polls are the way they are and how they will be reversed in time. They're not out there saying Joe Biden's actually really way more popular than this, and Donald Trump, well, no one likes him. They're not doing that. They're incorporating the reality of these totally unsupported and unsupportable numbers about Donald Trump's popularity because those numbers communicate the same message that they actually understand from their real lives. People are sick to death of what the uniparty in our country is doing, and they understand that Donald Trump is the alternative. There was a hate movement waged against Donald Trump and his supporters, and nonetheless, we're all still here supporting the same things louder than ever before. No matter the political persecution, the censorship, the propaganda, people being hauled off to prison for no reason, FBI showing up at people's doors, deplatforming, debanking, being kept out of stores and concerts, public shame campaigns, all of it. Everybody is still here, still supporting Donald Trump, and the MAGA and America First movements grow every single day. Every single day. It's been that way for years now. Every day it gets bigger. No one's contesting the results. The DeSantis simps aren't suggesting we wait till the Republican convention. And the reason is because everybody knows, everybody else knows this is what was going to happen. Donald Trump is that popular. And because he's that popular, he's inevitable. People's opinions have changed over time. Everyone is aware of that. Everyone is aware of their own position shifting and the positions of those around them shifting. If you are the sort of person who lives only on social media and you only interact with people of your same political persuasion, you might not realize that. But for anyone else who has a life out there in the world, you will know that no one is happy with what is happening right now. Even people who watch normie news and listen to normie podcasts from the Daily Wire and Tim Pool and Joe Rogan and all of them, they know too. They know Trump's the guy. And so consider what we have here. We have absolute narrative dominance to the point where no one questions Donald Trump's status as the victor, while at the same time having absolutely no reassurance whatsoever that the votes that made up these primary results were legitimate or even real. Yet no one is questioning the outcome of the election. Now, people like me and other people who are focused on election integrity, we'll question the actual reported results, because there is overwhelming evidence that our elections are riddled with fraud and manipulation. But we're not questioning the outcome, and neither is anyone else, because everyone already understood this was inevitable. That is narrative dominance. This primary win says absolutely nothing about our elections, but it says absolutely everything about our narrative dominance. This is a display of pure and uncontestable narrative power. And the only way to do that in the face of censorship and propaganda and political persecution, the only way that's possible is with the truth on your side and with a vast, vast majority. And that is exactly what we have. This is far more powerful than, quote unquote, winning a rigged election. And this will ultimately be what carries us through this fall during the election season, however that ends up looking, with however much chaos is injected into those proceedings. Consider where we are compared to November 8th of 2020. You'll remember November 7th was that Saturday where they told us, oh yeah, the TV has finally decided that Joe Biden is the winner. So compare things a day after that to right now. If right now you were told that Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes in this year 2024 election and Donald Trump received somewhere in the neighborhood of 74 or 75 million votes, would you believe it? No, you wouldn't. Neither would anyone else. That's the point. And most of those people who wouldn't believe it right now also don't believe it about 2020 anymore, if they ever even did. Now, if you think that all of that is somehow the result of a black pill because our elections are bullshit, I don't know what to tell you. I think it's more of a black pill to claim that our entire future relies on everybody going and pressing little buttons on an iPad attached to a black box and then just hoping the television says the right thing. And see, here's the other thing. Once you recognize that degree of narrative dominance, and once you understand that the country overall is waking up to what's been done and they are turning on the people who lied to them, then you understand that you have leverage. And it's a matter of what to do with that leverage. What do you push for with that leverage? Do you push the people pretending to represent you to make this system legitimate? Do you push them to tell you the truth? Do you demand that the people in media tell you the truth? Or do you proceed forward in fear, worried that if you say the wrong thing, someone might not vote the way you want them to? If the government's being handed back to the people, then the people need to start demanding some changes. I've been saying for months that if elections are not about the votes, and rigged elections cannot be about the votes, then an election is, at bottom, a battle of narratives. And that is exactly what we have just seen. While I have no doubt that Donald Trump did win in the voting booth, we have no way of substantiating that. It is undoubtedly true that Donald Trump did win in the court of public opinion. I mean, honestly, what does it mean to win 75% of the vote in Washington state? What does it mean to win 80% of the vote in California? They let you print your ballot out and put it in a Mark Zuckerberg Dropbox. You can't trust the votes. You can only trust the narrative. Now let's talk TikTok. Last week, we got news that a bill had been passed out of committee looking to potentially ban TikTok from app stores in the United States unless they would divest the ByteDance interest in the company, selling the company in America to an American firm so that ByteDance, the CCP associated company, would no longer be in the picture. I discussed all of this on Friday and raised a couple of concerns with what we knew at that point about this bill. In my mind, the Uniparty in America and the Chinese Communist Party are not different entities. They are part of the same thing. They are part of the global regime. The CCP was started by Trotskyites. American neoconservatism was started by Trotskyites. George H.W. Bush, 30 some odd years ago, opened up America's corporate relationship with the CCP, making the Chinese Communist Party much more wealthy, much more powerful. And it just so happens that both sides are Trotskyites. How does that work? So I don't think the American Uniparty and the CCP are any different. I don't have, therefore, any greater interest in defending American minds from CCP propaganda than I have from defending them from Uniparty propaganda. We all battle Uniparty propaganda every day. The solution is not to censor it. The solution is not to make sure no one ever sees it again. It's to make sure that people can recognize it when they see it, understand the messages being communicated in that propaganda, and how to reject them. That's the solution. It's not to ban them. I also, as a person who has legitimately and provably been censored by the state, have no interest in allowing those proponents of censorship to tell me who else they're going to censor on my behalf. So I expressed my concerns on Friday. Donald Trump had come out and said that he opposed the bill because all banning TikTok would do would make Facebook more powerful, and Facebook is just as bad. And of course, Facebook is just as bad. Facebook is as intimately connected to our uniparty as ByteDance could possibly be to the CCP. And so are our other so-called American social media platforms. Google, Meta, Twitter, Snapchat, etc. were all involved in installing the fake president in the fake White House. I don't have to like TikTok to understand that I don't want those other platforms empowered. So just right there, I personally am not in favor of this. Now, there has been a lot of interesting conversation on our side of the football. People disagreeing about this issue, all of whom I have no doubt about their intentions for America First and MAGA. And so I want to talk about a few of those disagreements and look at this TikTok thing from a few different angles. Yesterday, we talked about how the Rumble CEO, Chris Pavlovski, published a letter to the CEO of ByteDance offering to put together a consortium to buy and operate TikTok in America. Pavlovski also posted this yesterday on Truth Social. Should state governments work with cloud companies that get pushed around by foreign countries? Should U.S. companies work with cloud companies that get pushed around by foreign countries? Everyone should start asking these questions. And so he's talking about state governments and American companies working with, it sounds like, Amazon Web Services. That is their chief competitor. And if I am reading Pavlovski correctly, then he is insinuating that Amazon Web Services gets pushed around by foreign countries. And I have absolutely no doubt that's true. But it's probably only the good foreign countries, the ones that we would go to war to preserve, like Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan. Or maybe it's just one of those. Now, I know people like Tucker Carlson have scared the bejesus out of Americans when it comes to TikTok. But TikTok is no more dangerous than Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Threads, all those meta companies. Then you've got Google and their search engine and their ad service and YouTube and all of those algorithms. You have old Twitter and everything that happened in the DMs. And then you've got the cloud computing companies like Amazon Web Services. Think about these tech behemoths and the oligarchs who run them. We're telling ourselves that the one app that is officially connected to the CCP is far more dangerous than these other apps that are unofficially connected to the CCP. But let's get the latest. From the Associated Press today, House passes a bill that could lead to a TikTok ban if Chinese owner refuses to sell. The House on Wednesday passed a bill that would lead to a nationwide ban of the popular video app TikTok if its China-based owner doesn't sell, as lawmakers acted on concerns that the company's current ownership structure is a national security threat. The bill passed by a vote of 352 to 65, and it now goes to the Senate where its prospects are unclear. Biden, by the way, has said that he will sign it, but of course he's a fake president, so who cares? TikTok, which has more than 150 million American users, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Chinese technology firm ByteDance Limited. The lawmakers contend that ByteDance is beholden to the Chinese government, which could demand access to the data of TikTok's consumers in the U.S. anytime it wants. The worry stems from a set of Chinese national security laws that compel organizations to assist with intelligence gathering. And we have, by the way, those same types of laws here in the United States of America. They all benefit our uniparty. We hear about these issues all the time, and we say, oh, of course, if it saves just one life, we need to give away all our data to the government. And in between normies giving their data away to the government, they are putting their DNA on little strips of paper and enclosing them in plastic and sending them to China so they can find out their 1024th Native American like Pocahontas. Now, only 15 Republicans voted against this bill. A handful of Republicans abstained from voting, but 197 voted for it, only 15 against. Here are the 15. Andy Biggs from Arizona, Bishop from North Carolina, Davidson from Ohio, Duarte from California, Matt Gaetz from Florida, Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, Clay Higgins from Louisiana, Nancy Mace from South Carolina, Thomas Massey from Kentucky, Tom McClintock from California, Mooney of West Virginia, Moore of Alabama, Scott Perry in Pennsylvania, Schweikert from Arizona, and Greg Stubbe from Florida. So there are a bunch of popular America First MAGA names in that group. And I think those people are on the right track. Some of my friends do not. Now, one person who is not my friend and also does not agree with me is Eye Patch McCain himself, Dan Crenshaw, who, unless everything is just a stage play, is one of the worst rhinos in the Congress, especially now that Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger are gone.
To address all of my colleagues who I think are confused about the First Amendment, confused about the nature of TikTok, and confused about the intentions of the Chinese Communist Party. Let me explain this really simple. TikTok is owned by ByteDance. ByteDance is in China. And when you're in China, you have to do whatever the Chinese Communist Party says you have to do. That's according to the National Intelligence Law passed in 2017. If they want you to spy for them, you will spy for them. That's how that works. They have a board member from the Chinese Communist Party on ByteDance. You wouldn't allow a radio tower owned by the Chinese to be put up right in the middle of Washington, D.C., and then allow it to just put out Chinese propaganda. You'd probably complain about that. That's exactly what TikTok can be used for, because millions of Americans are addicted to it. They see it, and the Chinese can absolutely manipulate those algorithms. The First Amendment does not give the Chinese Communist Party the right to American data or the right to manipulate the minds of Americans. That would be a really weird interpretation of the First Amendment. The primary counterarguments to this bill seem to be as shallow as, well, it doesn't do everything I want, and Facebook's really mean, and I don't want them to make money. So what, then that means you owe Chinese access to all of our data and access to manipulate the minds of Americans? I don't think so. This is a very specific bill, very specifically tailored. It does not harm American companies or American individuals. You know it. You got to read it. Pass this bill.
Now, this may not harm American companies, but I think the people who live on TikTok and make a living on TikTok might feel like it's harming American individuals. But let's leave that aside, too. Everything else Dan Crenshaw just described is something that all of the American social media apps I just described, all of those tech platforms, are also guilty of. They propagandize Americans, they censor Americans, they manipulate Americans, they psyop Americans, they push propaganda from the global regime onto America. It doesn't matter whether it's coming from the Uniparty here or the CCP, it's the same thing. They are both just the iteration of the global regime in China versus in America. Now, there is some concern over the special interests pushing on both sides of this debate. There is a man named Jeff Yass, who is a mega donor with the Club for Growth. People say he's fully captured by the CCP and he has billions of dollars invested in TikTok, and that's why he does not want to see it banned. Maybe that's true. Senator Rand Paul wrote last week, if Congress bans TikTok, they will be acting just like the Chinese communists who have also banned TikTok. Wait, what? And let's rewind a second. Where is all of this coming from? Because Donald Trump tried to do this very same thing back when he was in his first term, and the court stopped him. And he didn't have the entirety of the Uniparty backing him at the time. So what has changed? Well, this is the New York Times from November 2nd, 2023, so just last fall. TikTok pushes back against claims it fuels anti-Semitism. TikTok pushed back on Thursday against growing claims in recent weeks that it had failed to protect Jewish users and had pushed pro-Palestinian content in the United States. In a statement on its website, the company said, hateful ideologies like anti-Semitism are not and have never been allowed on our platform. The company said that since October 7th, Hamas' attack on Israel, it had removed millions of TikTok videos related to hate speech, hateful behavior, harassment, and bullying. So TikTok was already censoring its platform to get rid of quote unquote objectionable content. Many social networks have come under criticism for spreading misinformation and hate speech during the Israel-Hamas war. TikTok has the added scrutiny of being owned by the Chinese company ByteDance. While Beijing has pitched itself as a neutral broker in the dispute, the surge of anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli sentiment is proliferating across the Chinese internet and state media. Last week, Jeff Morris Jr., a former vice president at the dating app Tinder, claimed that pro-Palestinian hashtags on TikTok garnered 3 billion views, while pro-Israel hashtags gathered a couple 100 million views. His post, published on X, formerly known as Twitter, was part of a longer thread that was seen millions of times and argued that TikTok was the reason Israel was, quote, losing the information war with high school and college students, end quote. Mr. Morris's post appeared to reference views from the hashtag over several years. The company seemed to refer to Mr. Morris's posts on Thursday, criticizing an unsound analysis of TikTok hashtag data around the conflict. TikTok said the hashtag Stand With Israel had gained 46.3 million views since October 7th in the United States, compared with 29.4 million for Stand With Palestine. Mr. Morris didn't immediately respond to a request for comment, so he was just wrong. A group of Jewish TikTok creators and celebrities who post to the platform, including the comedian Amy Schumer and the actors Michael Rappaport and Deborah Messing, wrote an open letter to TikTok on Wednesday saying it was, quote, falling woefully short by not protecting the safety of its Jewish creators and community and by not monitoring and guiding public discourse to ensure the platform doesn't become a permanent cesspool of indiscriminate and aggressive anti-Semitism. So they want to censor any language they deem to be anti-Semitic, which means that you're only allowed to support Israel on one of these platforms. That seems to be what they're pushing for. Yael Eisenstadt, a vice president at the Anti-Defamation League, said that her group has given training to TikTok on anti-Semitic content and that its website maintains a, quote, glossary of extremism and hate that it regularly updates. And you should go check it out if you never have. It's absurd. Ms. Eisenstadt said she appreciated TikTok's outreach to her group, but added, quote, that does not abdicate them from the responsibility to actually provide more tools to civil society groups to study what's actually happening. Actually, they don't have any responsibility to do that whatsoever. This stuff is just crazy. Companies do not have any responsibility to share their internal data with groups like the Anti-Defamation League. That is absolutely bonkers. She said the recent outcry over the posts on the site showed that TikTok should offer data on how it serves videos to civil liberty groups. The company said it started offering such data to academic researchers and will include other groups in the future. So apparently they are happy to share it, but regardless, they have no responsibility to do so. Here's Time magazine from last Thursday, March 7th. Author Anthony Goldblum, CEO of a company called Sumble and an investment partner at AIX Ventures, which is a venture capital firm focused on AI. In the aftermath of the 2016 U.S. presidential election, Americans woke up to the terrifying potential for social media to be harnessed by foreign powers to interfere with our domestic politics. A 2018 indictment brought by special counsel Robert Mueller detailed the ways in which Russian interests manipulated Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram to rally support behind hashtags like Hillary for prison, I won't protect Hillary, and at the other end of the spectrum, MAGA and Trump 2016. So it's Russia's fault for manipulating social media and Trump being elected. That is the awful consequence, the terrifying potential fully realized. We are entering the 2024 election cycle with a far more direct threat. TikTok, which has over 170 million monthly active users in the United States, more than half the total U.S. population of any age. In fact, it's far more than half, because we are led to understand the massive population of illegal aliens as also part of our overall population in the United States. He notes that the company is owned by ByteDance. We need to take that very seriously, not only because TikTok is generally influential with young Americans, but because we've already seen it drive political sentiment, especially on college campuses. And so he says he's for the legislation and gets into why. According to Pew, he writes, 32% of Americans aged 18 to 29 say they regularly get news from TikTok, up from 9% in 2020. This makes it one of the top news sources for Gen Z, and we've already seen its potential for real-world impact. After the October 7th attacks by Hamas against Israel, the Anti-Defamation League recorded a 10x increase in anti-Semitic incidents on U.S. college campuses. This coincided with a surge of pro-Palestinian content on TikTok. At peak, 98.6% of U.S. views on TikTok of content related to the Israel-Hamas war carried a pro-Palestinian hashtag. And we are supposed to assume that all of these statistics are correct. There is no reason to assume that any of these statistics are correct, especially with the ADL involved. We know that they were involved with Media Matters last year when Media Matters ran that little op on Twitter to generate ad appearances next to content that they labeled as extremist content, then take that to the companies and suggest that those companies are not safe to advertise on Twitter because Twitter is going to place their products next to, for instance, neo-Nazi content, white supremacist content, etc. There is, unfortunately, no reason to believe that any of what was just said is actually true. Social media is understood to be a mirror, reflecting back what people believe and engage with. However, TikTok's view ratio does not map to public opinion, even among young people. A Pew poll published on December 8th showed a roughly even split among respondents aged 18 to 29 on the question of whether Hamas or the Israel government bears a lot of responsibility for the Israel-Hamas war. Clearly, the TikTok algorithm does more than reflect pre-existing sentiment. No, once again, that's not clear because there's no reason to believe that poll. And the fact that 42% believe the Israeli government bears a lot of responsibility for the event, that 42% is already in the face of a mass media movement to convince everyone of the opposite. Goldblum goes on to argue that TikTok is far more likely to be displaying anti-Semitic or anti-Israel views than Instagram or X. And it's funny because the ADL had an entire campaign to go after Elon Musk and X last year. I guess TikTok is just so much worse. This actually shows Instagram as worse than X too, but I digress. He then shows the lack of TikTok traffic when it comes to subjects that are inconvenient to the Chinese Communist Party, like hashtag Hong Kong protest and hashtag Uyghur genocide. Here is a perspective in the complete and total opposite direction. This is from the communist rag Jacobin from yesterday. Banning TikTok is a terrible idea. This censorious idea, says the article, has been pushed by conservatives for years and was recently given renewed momentum with a bill set to be voted on in the House this week, and President Joe Biden pledging to sign it into law. In the eyes of the forces backing the measure, banning TikTok in the United States would be an easy way to fix what the Anti-Defamation League's Jonathan Greenblatt referred to in a leaked phone call, the, quote, major generational problem, end quote, that the pro-war, pro-Israel side faces, where the divide over U.S. support for Israel is, quote, not left and right, it is young and old, end quote. A divide that can be seen perhaps most clearly on the video sharing service. Since Israel began its systematic razing of Gaza 5 months ago, many other pro-Israel voices have insisted that the reason survey after poll after questionnaire shows young people are by far the most unsympathetic to Israel and critical of its war is simply because of TikTok. October 7th really opened people's eyes to what's happening on TikTok and its differential treatment of different topics. Democratic Illinois Representative Raja Krishnamurthy, one of the co-sponsors of the ban, recently said, sure enough, last November, 25 Republican lawmakers signed a letter to TikTok CEO Shu Chu, charging that a, quote, deluge of pro-Hamas content, end quote, on the platform is, quote, driving hateful anti-Semitic rhetoric and violent protests on campuses across the country. And we were shown all of that on TV and on social media for a few weeks. Aren't you glad that 25 Republican lawmakers are prepared to ban a social media app or force its sale because, as they suggest, the app is promoting anti-Israel sentiment? Calling for a ban. Republican Missouri Senator Josh Hawley claimed there's a, quote, ubiquity of anti-Israel content on TikTok, end quote, while Republican Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who has introduced his own TikTok ban bill into the Senate, called it, quote, a tool China uses to spread propaganda to Americans, end quote, that was now, quote, being used to downplay Hamas terrorism, among other Republican senators. Republican Wisconsin Representative Mike Gallagher, the other co-sponsor of the House ban, charged that TikTok was what was giving young Americans, quote, the raw news that gave them an, quote, upside-down worldview to root, quote, against a key American ally. Now, it's important to note that at no point during any of this should we assume that any foreign interests, and certainly not Israel, are involved in attempting to guide these social media platforms and the content that they show to American citizens. If persons or entities from foreign countries or the countries themselves were trying to influence what Americans were shown on social media apps, well, that would just be unacceptable. The commie at Jacobin writes, as on immigration, the White House has accepted the Republicans' framing of this issue. A spokesperson for Biden's National Security Council recently told Rolling Stone that TikTok poses a threat to U.S. national security, quote, through the manipulation by foreign powers of Americans' views and beliefs, end quote. This Republican-led push for censorship has been reinforced by behind-the-scenes pressure from pro-war celebrities, Zionist groups like the ADL, and tech executives like the former executive of dating app Tinder, Jeff Morris Jr., who is, quote, convinced TikTok is, quote, the reason we're losing the information war with high school and college students. All of them have pressed TikTok to censor more pro-Palestine content. So whether you're a warmongering globalist who wants Israel to glass the desert, just eliminate every Palestinian on earth, or you are some deranged communist who writes for Jacobin, there is no argument that one of the big reasons for this push to ban TikTok, one of the justifications and one of the sources of pressure to get this ban done, is the Israel lobby and groups like the ADL. We talked last fall and throughout the winter about a cancel culture developing with people who identify themselves as conservatives. All of a sudden, we needed to create safe spaces on campus. There were certain things that just couldn't be written about and certain things that just couldn't be said. If you argued with the central narrative, you were accused of supporting any sort of atrocity that they could make up and attribute to Hamas. Now, I don't think any of these people are right, and I don't think that they're operating in good faith. The commie at Jacobin just wants the censorship to go in his direction so that the people, as he would describe them, the workers, the true communists out there, so that they could finally see their vision realized. And obviously the pro-Israel lobby and the pro-war lobby, the military-industrial complex and the global regime, they want to see TikTok taken down or banned or have the ownership change hands so that narratives they care about can be pushed. It wasn't only the pro-Israel argument that the writer in Time magazine was citing and using as a justification for his position. He still believes in Russian collusion, Russian interference in the 2016 election that allowed Donald Trump to win. That's preposterous. So I don't agree with either of these people or their motivations. I ultimately do come down on the same side of the issue, unfortunately, as the commie from Jacobin, but I'm not sure I would be any happier to be aligned with the warmongering lunatics who want to glass Gaza in an effort toward further censorship. And I certainly don't trust the likes of Dan Crenshaw as he goes and messages to the American public on their behalf. All right, so let's take a look at some more interesting viewpoints, some viewpoints from our side that are nonetheless divergent. Some of the back and forth over the past few days that the public has been kind of digesting this issue has been over whether or not this bill would allow the U.S. government an opportunity to take down a site like X or Rumble. And here is Raheem Kassam from the National Pulse, who went through the actual text of the bill. He makes the argument that none of that can happen.
So I just want to read to you very quickly why this is not a threat to X. They are not going to just, what this doesn't do is give the regime more power over your domestic rights to say things on social media. This is taking power away from the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese Communist Party members, investors, foreign nationals, ByteDance, and other foreign adversaries. And we'll get into the definition of that in a second. I won't take up too much of your time. To protect the national security of the United States from threat posed by foreign adversary-controlled applications, such as TikTok and any successor application or service and any other application or service developed or provided by ByteDance Limited, that's TikTok's parent company, or an entity under the control of ByteDance Limited. So off the bat, we're very specific, right? This is foreign adversary-controlled applications and ByteDance Limited or an entity under the control of ByteDance Limited. As you can see, I've done my highlights on this just to make sure that I was right, had to go through it again. So we talk about, in general, prohibition of foreign adversary-controlled applications. It shall be unlawful for an entity to distribute, maintain, or update or enable the distribution, maintenance, or updating of a foreign adversary-controlled application. What, therefore, you ask, is a foreign adversary-controlled application? Well, an application that satisfies the definition of a foreign adversary-controlled application pursuant to subsection G3A, that is in here as well, G3A. Foreign adversary-controlled application, the term foreign adversary-controlled application, how many times can I say it, means a website, desktop application, mobile application, or augmented or immersive technology application that is operated directly or indirectly, including through a parent company, subsidiary, or affiliate by A, any of ByteDance, TikTok, a subsidiary or successor to an entity identified in clause I or II that is controlled by a foreign adversary, or an entity owned or controlled directly or indirectly by an entity identified in clause III or III, or a company covered that is controlled by a foreign adversary and that is determined by the president to present a significant threat to the national security of the United States, following the issuance of a public notice proposing such determination, a public report to Congress submitted not less than 30 days before such determination, describing the specific national security concern involved and containing a classified annex and description of what assets would need to be divested to execute a qualified divestiture. Very, very specific, okay? This isn't about, any social media firm that does something or says something or hosts something that we don't like. This talks about divestiture, right? In other words, this is the exact legislation that Trump wanted passed when he was still in office, right? In the first term. This was having Chinese communist-controlled companies having to either not be able to reach Americans and your data and watch you through the front face of your video camera on your phones and all of that, or it's divestiture. It's selling. You have to sell a certain amount of the company for the US under this legislation to be satisfied that you are not a foreign adversary-controlled entity, right? Which I think is literally what we've all wanted Congress to do for years now. And suddenly the Jeff Yass and the Club for Growth and the Lolbertarians on the internet start coming and going, oh, this is going to apply to X. They are lying to you, and they are taking money to lie to you. Foreign adversary country. The term foreign adversary country means a country specified in section 4872D2 of Title 10, United States Code. Wow. I just so happen to have a copy of that right here. Covered nation. The Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, the People's Republic of China, the Russian Federation, the Islamic Republic of Iran. This legislation is not meant to censor you on X. It is not meant to target American companies. You are being played right now by the people who are willing to take money from the Chinese Communist Party. If they're willing to take money from the Chinese Communist Party to lie to you about this, then I don't know why you're following them at all. But what do I know? I've only been working on this for like a fucking decade.
Okay, so if you've listened to the show for any amount of time, you'll know that I am a big fan of Steve Bannon and the War Room. Raheem Kassam is an old school member of the War Room. I have a lot of respect for Raheem. I hit him up on Truth Social this afternoon to see if he's open for discussion on this issue. We used to follow each other on Twitter. Maybe that'll happen. Hopefully it will. But I want to bring up a few concerns about what he's saying. His colleague at the National Pulse, the outlet he started, Will Upton, wrote this article this afternoon as well. The headline is, I worked on the Trump admin's TikTok ban, and this America First bill is exactly what we wanted. In the final days of President Donald Trump's first term, there was a concerted effort to tackle the problem of TikTok and its ownership by the Chinese technology and entertainment conglomerate ByteDance. Within the administration, there were two leading positions on the question of what to do regarding the social media app and its use by the Chinese Communist government as a tool to collect data and spy on Americans. One faction, predominantly led by Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, sought a path to force ByteDance to divest itself from the TikTok app through a sale to an American company. The other faction, centered around White House economic advisor Peter Navarro, pushed for an outright ban of the popular Chinese-controlled social media app through an executive order. Former President Donald Trump ultimately opted for a responsible escalation in handling the issue, first working to negotiate a sale of the U.S. TikTok operations to either Microsoft or Oracle. When that fell apart due to ByteDance's intransigence, Trump moved to ban the app outright through executive order. A federal judge, unfortunately, stayed the order. After the 2020 election, President Joe Biden ultimately abandoned efforts to ban the app. The legislation introduced by Representative Mike Gallagher, which would force ByteDance to divest itself from TikTok or face a ban in the U.S., reflects the Trump Treasury Department's view on handling the Chinese-owned social platform. H.R. 7521, the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications app, is not an outright ban on the app. Instead, it is a responsible approach to ensuring both market competition and the protection of Americans from Chinese espionage. As former Treasury Secretary Mnuchin held in 2020, the divestiture route would prevent continued Chinese ownership, ending the accompanying foreign espionage and national security concerns, and preserve competition in the U.S. social media app market. And I might disagree with that construction right there. There is absolutely no guarantee that a divestiture would accomplish that or be able to maintain it in the long term. Because as we see now, fully quote-unquote American companies have all the same problems. The legislation is also extremely limited in terms of its scope. It applies only to nations designated by the U.S. government as foreign adversaries. These nations are North Korea, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Russian Federation, and the People's Republic of China. ByteDance was narrowly able to avert both a forced sale of TikTok and a ban on the app in 2020. Since then, the Chinese company has built a massive influence operation on Capitol Hill and in state capitals across the U.S. All the while, TikTok has continued to share the data of American citizens with Beijing, despite its claims to the contrary. Late last year, the National Pulse reported on this influence operation, detailing how ByteDance increased pressure on congressional Republicans to oppose efforts to ban the TikTok app. Critical to ByteDance's influence operation has been the neoliberal advocacy group, the Club for Growth, and the group's top donor and GOP megadonor, Jeff Yass. The billionaire is heavily leveraged into TikTok with $21 billion of his $28 billion net worth invested in the app. Now, that is an enormous fortune. And the Club for Growth just recently capitulated to Donald Trump. I don't know much about the history of this man, Jeff Yass, but it sounds like he is a potential candidate for drainage. But we will leave that aside for today. Two of H.R. 7521's most outspoken opponents received significant campaign support from Yass, Thomas Massie and Rand Paul. Upton says both men falsely claimed that the Gallagher legislation would allow the U.S. government to ban social media platforms like X, formerly Twitter, or websites the government otherwise disagrees with. The legislation authorizes neither of these actions. Now, Trump's executive order on August 6th of 2020 referenced Executive Order 13873 of May 15th, 2019, securing the information and communications technology and services supply chain. So this was basically an add-on to that executive order. This executive order specifically addressing TikTok and affecting what amounts to a ban by prohibiting any transactions between American individuals and entities and the Chinese company that owns TikTok. That would make it impossible for them to receive money from advertising, and they would be taken out of the app stores. And to read from a bit of the executive order, specifically, the spread in the United States of mobile applications developed and owned by companies in the People's Republic of China continues to threaten the national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States. At this time, action must be taken to address the threat posed by one mobile application in particular, TikTok. TikTok, a video-sharing mobile application owned by the Chinese company ByteDance Limited, has reportedly been downloaded over 175 million times in the United States and over 1 billion times globally. TikTok automatically captures vast swaths of information from its users, including internet and other network activity information such as location data and browsing and search histories. This data collection threatens to allow the Chinese Communist Party access to Americans' personal and proprietary information, potentially allowing China to track the locations of federal employees and contractors, build dossiers of personal information for blackmail, and conduct corporate espionage. TikTok also reportedly censors content that the Chinese Communist Party deems politically sensitive, such as content concerning protests in Hong Kong and China's treatment of Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities. This mobile application may also be used for disinformation campaigns that benefit the Chinese Communist Party, such as when TikTok videos spread debunked conspiracy theories about the origins of the 2019 novel coronavirus. Now, as far as that description goes, you could apply that to CNN. CNN spread dangerous debunked theories about the origins of the coronavirus. In fact, they still do. And all of our other social media applications do everything else that TikTok was just accused of doing. As far as templates go, this is a great one. All of the anti-social media app arguments are easily made against TikTok in this contest. I am not saying that people aren't coming down on the right side of this argument, generally speaking, when it comes to looking at these tech platforms. I'm saying it makes no sense to isolate and single out TikTok, at least not for these reasons. Now, the fact that it is attached to the Chinese Communist Party, that is part of a different argument, one that I believe I addressed earlier. If you don't agree with me, that's all good. I'm not expecting to convince everyone. But to be as fair as possible to that side of the argument that I just happen not to come down on, I believe that their key points are China and the CCP, and therefore ByteDance, are particularly bad, even relative to Meta, Google, Amazon Web Services, Snapchat, etc. I don't agree with that argument, but I understand that it is being made in good faith, that China is different and particularly bad, and that therefore, even though the app does the same thing that all of the other apps do, it's worse because it's quote unquote Chinese. I think that they are convinced that this law would only ever apply to TikTok. It says in the text of the legislation that it only applies to these particular foreign adversary countries. There are 4 of them: North Korea, Iran, Russia, and China. So it does not apply to those U.S.-owned entities like Twitter and Rumble, and that it's specific enough so as not to be abused. Now, I disagree on all of those points, and I would argue that this wouldn't be the right approach regardless. Even if all that other stuff was true, taking down apps or forcing their sale subject to government approval is not the appropriate response to the dissemination of information that you're not a fan of. Even if I was to go so far as to agreeing that this information is actually dangerous, and I don't agree that it is. I understand that people are concerned about what their children are exposed to. Well, sorry to say it, but that's not the government's concern. I don't think I will ever be comfortable trusting the government to decide which information is too dangerous for me or anyone else to consume. Now, I know parents have a hard job and apps like this make their job harder, but it's not like it's impossible to keep your kid off TikTok. I mean, at some point, we're just going to have to become at least adequate and passable about surviving in this informational environment. It is not going to go back to a point where you are just given the right thing to say and think about whatever subject of the day might be relevant. All the people who had all the answers before, well, all of them were wrong. The people who judge what's true and false for these social media apps are wrong, and they are manipulating and lying to people. So who will be the judge of any of this? But let's do as Raheem Kassam implored us to do and take a look at the actual text of the bill, which I have done. I've made some of my own highlights, and if I am reading this and understanding it properly, then hopefully you will understand what has led me to the positions I have reached. This is Section 2, Prohibition of Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications. In general, prohibition of foreign adversary controlled applications. It shall be unlawful for an entity to distribute, maintain, or update, or enable the distribution, maintenance, or updating of a foreign adversary controlled application by carrying out within the land or maritime borders of the United States any of the following. There are 2 listings, A and B. Providing services to distribute, maintain, or update such foreign adversary controlled application, including any source code of such application, by means of a marketplace, including an online mobile application store, through which users within the land or maritime borders of the United States may access, maintain, or update such application, and B, providing internet hosting services to enable the distribution, maintenance, or updating of such foreign adversary controlled application for users within the land or maritime borders of the United States. So this is specifically directed toward the app stores. It would be banning TikTok from the app stores. And as we just discussed yesterday, in Europe even, Apple was pursuing the possibility to allow for downloads and updates from websites outside the App Store so that they could avoid these sorts of restrictions. So the key here is that this is targeting entities who would distribute, maintain, or update a foreign adversary controlled application. And that is the exact purpose of the Apple App Store and Google's Android store. So what they're doing is not actually banning TikTok. They are banning the app stores from offering TikTok and updates to TikTok. There's a provision that makes sure that within the 180 days between the passage of this bill and the eventual ban of TikTok, they would allow users to download their data. It says such data shall be provided in a machine-readable format and shall include any data maintained by such application with respect to the account of such user, including content posts, photos, and videos, and all other account information. So you would be able to get all your data off TikTok if this legislation passes between now and when TikTok would be ultimately banned. There are then provisions allowing for the divestiture. And if the divestiture happens before the ban would not happen. If the divestiture happens after the ban would be ended at the point the divestiture is completed. So let's jump down to the definitions. Controlled by a foreign adversary. The term controlled by a foreign adversary means, with respect to a covered company or other entity, that such a company or other entity is A foreign person that is domiciled in, is headquartered in, has its principal place of business in, or is organized under the laws of a foreign adversary country. So any person who lives in North Korea or is headquartered in Iran or has their principal place of business in Russia or is organized under the foreign laws of China or any combination of those would qualify here. Also, an entity with respect to which a foreign person or combination of foreign persons described in subparagraph A, so what we just read, directly or indirectly own at least a 20% stake. So if it was X, formerly Twitter, where a big chunk is owned by Saudi Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, then this doesn't apply because he only has like a 2.5% stake in X, formerly Twitter, and Saudi Arabia is not on the list of those foreign adversary nations. So therefore, he's no problem despite being one of the absolute worst characters in the world. And thank goodness for the specificity of this bill. You wouldn't want them going after X, formerly Twitter, and thank goodness they can't because this particular bill is so specific and we know that the terms of this bill are never going to be changed. There's also a section C here, a person subject to the direction or control of a foreign person or entity described in subparagraph A or B. So basically anyone who lives in, is headquartered in, has a principal place of business in, or is organized under the laws of the foreign power, or anyone or any business with a 20% stake in one of those businesses who meets all those qualifications, or anyone underneath them. So if there's someone with an ownership stake in one of these social media applications who is a couple jumps away from someone above them in that chain in one of these foreign adversary nations, that app could potentially be targeted, if I'm reading this correctly. They also define the type of social media site. They note that a covered company does not include an entity that operates a website, desktop application, mobile application, or augmented or immersive technology application, whose primary purpose is to allow users to post product reviews, business reviews, or travel and information reviews. So Yelp is not going to be affected by this. Now, under the definition of foreign adversary controlled application, this is what Rahim was going through. I don't think he went through B of this section, though. A covered company that I is controlled by a foreign adversary and II that is determined by the president to present a significant threat to the national security of the United States following the issuance of a public notice proposing such determination and a public report to Congress submitted not less than 30 days before such a determination, describing the specific national security concern involved and containing a classified annex and a description of what assets would need to be divested to execute a qualified divestiture. So Section A addresses TikTok and ByteDance, and Section B describes the process by which a president would determine that a foreign adversary controlled app becomes a risk to national security. And finally, in the bill, let's look at the qualified divestiture. The term qualified divestiture means a divestiture or similar transaction that A, the president determines through an interagency process would result in the relevant covered company no longer being controlled by a foreign adversary, and B, the president determines through an interagency process precludes the establishment or maintenance of any operational relationship between the United States operations of the relevant foreign adversary controlled application and any formerly affiliated entities that are controlled by a foreign adversary, including any cooperation with respect to the operation of a content recommendation algorithm or an agreement with respect to data sharing. So they want to make sure that the companies absolutely are separate, and specifically in relation to their content moderation algorithm and to the data they share. So there is no doubt that they are reading the specificity correctly. This is a highly specific bill designed to target TikTok and potentially an app from one of these foreign adversary nations. But should we consider these foreign adversary nations? There's certainly elements in each one of these nations that represent foreign adversaries. But what is a foreign adversary to us? The uniparty in the United States of America, currently occupying Washington, D.C., that international city-state that just happens to exist in our country for some reason, is a more concerning foreign adversary to me than Russia is. I do not trust the illegitimate President Joe Biden to choose who our foreign adversary countries are. I do not trust the illegitimate Congress to support or oppose those designations. I don't know why we would prefer influence from some foreign countries over influence from other foreign countries. The same people looking to ban apps were the ones inviting the comedic actor in Ukraine to speak before joint sessions of Congress. And speaking of Russia, what about this? What about the fact that Telegram was founded by two young Russian billionaires? Well, Russia is a foreign adversary according to this list. Wouldn't Telegram then therefore be a foreign adversary controlled application? I know that they say this bill is quite specific, but it seems like it would specifically target Telegram as well. Now, you could say no one's targeting Telegram. They're just talking about TikTok. Even if that was true, and it's not, that's not a good enough answer. Now, is it correct that this bill will actually accomplish what Trump set out to do in 2020? Or is it possible that this bill is intended to mirror the Trump effort in many aspects, but also shifted off course from what Trump wanted to do with his executive order? You have to think that's possible. It's also entirely possible that something bigger is going on here. We get the announcement last week that a bill has been passed through committee, and Donald Trump immediately responds, "This is the wrong thing to do. This will only empower Meta and Mark Zuckerberg," a platform and its owner that were both part of the 2020 election steal. Mark Zuckerberg invested $500 million of his own dollars into rigging that election, and all of the suite of Meta apps were involved and used for manipulating every story that we've seen since 2020 and long before. They participated in the censorship. They participated in the propaganda. They had the fact-checking services. They applied labels to the post. They took content down after requests from the government. They're every bit the threat that TikTok is. So Trump came out in opposition, and of course, the establishment conservatives who brand themselves on trying to look like CCP hawks, even though they are nothing of the sort, they got mad at Trump. Chip Roy, for instance, said he's wrong. And by the way, he had his own executive orders and actions he was doing. Now he's suddenly flipped around on that. Oh, yeah, Donald Trump going easy on the CCP again. It remains to be seen, but I think that the establishment conservatives going along with Democrats on this might come out not looking so great. But we shall see. My friend John Harold makes the interesting point that this is once again the illegitimate and fake Biden administration carrying out, at least to some degree, a policy proposal from the Trump administration. And consider how the narrative has developed here. Donald Trump put this forward in August 2020. The court said no. People got very upset about the TikTok ban. Then it all went away. Now it's come back around with people in both parties pushing for the ban. The uniparty is coming together to agree that now that TikTok has been mean to Israel, That's the final straw, and Donald Trump has his hands off this. Without saying anything nice about TikTok, without saying anything nice about the CCP, he simply opposes the ban because he says it's the wrong policy. I happen to agree with him, but even if he is just putting that out there so that he can stay at arm's length from this issue, all good. It will be very interesting to see what happens after the Truth Social merger, considering that Truth Social is linked to the Rumble cloud, and now Rumble is talking about cloud services controlled by foreign countries and offering to buy TikTok. You think it makes sense for Trump to have this whole TikTok issue at arm's length with all that going on? What happens if Rumble does buy TikTok and Truth Social has its association with Rumble, and Elon's got X, formerly Twitter, which he says is moving toward free speech? It certainly hasn't gotten there yet. But if Twitter and TikTok and Truth Social and Rumble have all been removed from the control of that global regime, which is a foreign adversary wherever it happens to exist, and we still have Telegram and Gab remaining free speech sites, well, that is a much stronger hand to be playing than what we were dealing with in 2020. And by the way, I always forget to mention Getter, but Getter's got spectacular technology. And oh, by the way, Getter is partially owned by Miles Guo. So does Getter get taken down? The specificity of a law written and passed by this illegitimate Congress and the illegitimate Senate and signed by this illegitimate president, that doesn't impress me. I am not going to rely on the specificity of the language in a bill from people who don't follow the law and aren't legitimately seated in the first place. But hey, that's just me. And finally, some rather big news in the Fani Willis RICO case down in Georgia. This is from the New York Times this morning. Judge quashes 6 charges in Georgia election case against Trump. In a surprise move on Wednesday, a judge in Atlanta quashed 6 of the charges against former President Donald J. Trump and his allies in the sprawling Georgia election interference case, including one related to a call that Mr. Trump made to pressure Georgia's Secretary of State early in January 2021. That's referring to that call to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, that one that was illegally recorded, that one we knew was illegally recorded back at that time, making that call irrelevant and inadmissible, even if Donald Trump had said something bad during it, and he didn't, which anyone who ever bothered listening to the call could tell by the time they're finished. But spectacular timing, isn't it? The nation just got a rerun of that story the other day, hearing about how that call was illegally recorded, and now we have Judge Scott McAfee dismissing some of these charges against Trump and others based on that call. The judge, Scott McAfee of Fulton Superior Court, left intact the rest of the racketeering indictment, which initially included 41 counts against 19 co-defendants. 4 of them have pleaded guilty since the indictment was handed up by a grand jury in August. While the ruling was certainly a setback for prosecutors, several legal observers said on Wednesday that it did not weaken the core of the case, the state racketeering charge that was brought against all of the defendants. And that is spectacular cope. There is not a case to begin with. Anything that weakens it from there makes it even worse for them. The idea that this is still a strong case is preposterous. It was never a strong case. It's been fake the entire time. That charge is based on overt acts that the indictment says various defendants took in furtherance of the racketeering conspiracy. The judge was explicit in stating that Wednesday's order does not apply to those acts. The ruling was not related to a defense effort to disqualify Fani Willis, the district attorney of Fulton County, who is leading the case. A ruling on that matter, which has made headlines for weeks after it was revealed that Ms. Willis had engaged in a romantic relationship with another prosecutor, is expected by the end of the week. I love how they say another prosecutor. That is her lead prosecutor. So the district attorney and the lead prosecutor were in a romantic relationship years ago that they lied about, and all of this has been spinning out of control for the last 3 months now. It is once again a good time to remember that the whole thing's fake. The 9-page ruling on Wednesday took aim at charges asserting that Mr. Trump and other defendants had solicited public officials to break the law by violating their oaths of office. For example, one count against Mr. Trump said that he, quote, unlawfully solicited, requested, and importuned, end quote, the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, to violate his oath of office by decertifying the election. The judge said that prosecutors were not specific enough about what violations the defendants were pressuring public officials to commit. Quote, these 6 counts contain all the essential elements of the crimes, but fail to allege sufficient detail regarding the nature of their commission. They do not give the defendants enough information to prepare their defenses intelligently, as the defendants could have violated the Constitution and thus the statute in dozens, if not hundreds, of distinct ways. So the judge here is saying that the prosecutors are accusing Trump of pressuring a public official, in this case, Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, to violate the law by finding the votes to overturn the election, as if Brad Raffensperger would have to make them up. But the indictment fails to specify what exactly Trump was asking Brad Raffensperger to do that was illegal. He's noting that there are countless ways that this law or statute could have been violated. Which one of those ways are you claiming actually happened here? And obviously, I cannot know for sure, but I have a strong suspicion that the reason there's no specific charge in here is because all Fani Willis did was essentially copy and paste the white paper from the Brookings Institution into this indictment. There's absolutely no substance to the claim that Donald Trump actually pressured Brad Raffensperger to do something illegal. He pressured him to do the job he swore an oath to do. So not only is the call inadmissible because it was illegally recorded, that's not what's been adjudicated here. The judge is basically dismissing some of these charges and telling Fani Willis, hey, if you can figure out something specific that you want to charge Donald Trump with here, you can go ahead and file that in an updated indictment. But this whole thing about the call, as you've described it, is not going to work. CNN did their own piece on this. They included a piece of analysis from their quote unquote legal analyst, Eli Honig. He said that the ruling constitutes an unforced error by prosecutors and an undeniable setback. He said while most of the charges remain intact, the judge has thrown out 6 charges for being legally defective. Essentially, prosecutors charged Trump and others with asking Georgia officials to violate the Constitution, but prosecutors failed to specify any underlying constitutional provision. Back to the New York Times. In a statement, Stephen Sadow, a lawyer for Mr. Trump, said, the ruling is a correct application of the law, as the prosecution failed to make specific allegations of any alleged wrongdoing on those counts. The entire prosecution of President Trump is political, constitutes election interference, and should be dismissed. One of the 6 charges that was quashed, count 28, relates to Mr. Trump's telephone call to Mr. Raffensperger, in which he pressured the Secretary of State to find him enough votes to overturn the presidential election. Another charge, count 38, related to a letter that Mr. Trump sent to Mr. Raffensperger in September 2021, asking him to decertify the Georgia presidential election results or seek similar legal remedies and announce the true winner. Other counts quashed by the judge also related to attempts to pressure public officials. 3 counts, listed as numbers 2, 6, and 23 in the indictment, allege that several defendants broke the law when they urged Georgia lawmakers to appoint pro-Trump electors after Joseph R. Biden won the state. Nice try, commies. Count 5 concerned a call that Mr. Trump made to David Ralston, who was then the Speaker of the Georgia House. During that conversation, Mr. Trump pressed Mr. Ralston to call a special legislative session to appoint new electors. Mr. Trump and his former personal lawyer, Rudolph Giuliani, had faced the most charges at 13 apiece. They now each face 10 charges in the Georgia case. So Donald Trump is down from 91 indictments to 88 indictments. So he is still so indicted, but slightly less indicted than he was this morning. The New York Times naturally provides some reaction from regime communists. Anthony Michael Kreis, a law professor at Georgia State University, noted that prosecutors could appeal the judge's order, or they could put more detailed versions of the challenged charges before a grand jury, which could issue a superseding indictment. For that reason, and because the racketeering charges are not affected, Mr. Kreis characterized the judge's order as a, quote, small blip, as opposed to a major catastrophe for the case against Donald Trump and his allies. Norman Eisen from the Brookings Institution, the man who was involved in writing the white papers from which these indictments were copy and pasted, is also quoted here. Norman Eisen, who served as special counsel to the House Judiciary Committee during the first Trump impeachment and has voiced support for the Georgia prosecution, well, of course he has, he wrote it, agreed. I think this is a full steam ahead signal about the RICO portion of this case. Now that is even stronger cope than we heard before. What is he talking about? This is not a full speed ahead signal on the RICO segment of this case. This is one big chunk now gone. This is a huge disaster that has started before election evidence has even begun to be presented in this case. Things can only get worse from here. There is nothing underlying any of this. It doesn't matter that the RICO charges are still there. The RICO charges, some of these people have now. Mark Meadows, all charges against him except for the RICO charge have been dismissed. We could get word on Fani Willis this week. What happens if she's gone? Or even better, what happens if she stays as this lame duck prosecutor, totally discredited, in a sexual relationship with her lead prosecutor, money exchanged, claims of corruption. Nothing there in the first place, as she just copy and pasted her indictment from the Brookings white paper, more or less. And leaving aside the legal machinations of a fake trial, think back to where we started today in the narrative warfare and the narrative dominance. Imagine you are one of the Get Trump people who finally thought that this Fani Willis RICO indictment, that was going to be the ultimate silver bullet that brought down the whole thing. Jack Smith, Fani Willis, Alvin Bragg, E. Jean Carroll, Arthur Engeron, and Letitia James, they're all going to take down that mean orange man. They're going to make him pay more than $500 million in fines, and then they're going to throw him in prison for 700 years based on these 91 indictments. Well, 88 indictments now. Imagine being one of those people and hearing about all this. Imagine being one of those people and having to watch this Fani Willis trial spin out of control. The personal relationships, what a mess. You want them to be removed at this point just so that they won't do any more damage to the Get Trump effort. You hope that they can be removed and replaced. Some new attorneys will come in and, they'll get Trump. Imagine to have that be the thing that you are clinging to in order to make all of this stop. People on our side get concerned about what will happen if our elections aren't fixed, even though we know and everybody knows who's going to win. And these people are just hoping that all of these many indictments, all of these little attempts they thought they had toward finally bringing down the monster, collapse slowly. They know they're collapsing. They probably have some sense that they have no chance of winning on any of this. Now they just hope that it can be a problem enough for long enough that Donald Trump can't win the election. Except here's the thing. The election is a narrative battle. That's what it has to be when the reported results are totally untrustworthy. And what do you get when you apply that exact same principle to these court proceedings? Knowing that the judicial system cannot be assured to be any more legitimate or free or fair than our elections are? Well, it's a battle of narratives there too. Donald Trump is being tried in the court of public opinion, and he is winning. Eventually, all of the people in that uniparty regime, all of the supporters of the regime, all of these people who went along with the COVID narrative and all of those destructive mitigation steps, all the people who supported this fake president and the election theft, the usurpation of this country, they'll all be put on trial in the court of public opinion too. And I don't think they're going to come out looking like Donald Trump. I'm going to take Thursday off. I will be back on Friday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under a quarter per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree, linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's